Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the last day of the e-University. We hope you're enjoying these sessions, absorbing the information, and reflecting on how to integrate these steps in this last phase of your action planning journey. We've now heard from Ian Graham about getting ready for implementation, and from Regina Trenkler-Fraser about funding strategy. Those films are now available on URBACT YouTube, and you could think about sharing them with your colleagues and your URBACT local group. So a little recap from day 2 yesterday. With the networks, we can see your work on the mirror boards. Thanks also for sharing some of those on social media. We'll hear more about that later when we bring the URBACT team into the studio. We had a comment from the IoT Exchange Network, who worked yesterday on the funding mix and appraisal tool to work with like a fictitious city case to appraise which funding options seemed best for them. And they gave us feedback that this tool is actually better suited for face-to-face meetings. And to be honest, that's actually our intention with all of these tools. They're designed to facilitate co-creation, to work together with stakeholders. But we know only too well how the pandemic has curtailed our ability to do that for now. So we're doing our best to work online and to try out these tools during the e-University so that you're well prepared to make use of them in your cities in the future. But thanks for that feedback from that network. In the afternoon sessions, the fireside chat on EU funding had 70 people attending. Giovanna from Schaerbeek, who we met in the live session, spoke about the ways the municipality had slowly started to get involved in EU funding schemes. She stressed the importance of learning by doing and by raising awareness at political level. How crucial it is that the administration at political level are aware of upcoming funding opportunities, especially at EU level, and that can be done through things like briefings and newsletters. They use external help to identify matching EU funding opportunities with local priorities. And that enabled them to engage in a proactive way and make those assessments before the calls themselves. She concluded by saying, a full-time person on EU funding is a key factor of success, but also take baby steps in order to get far. In that same session, Carlos from Braga talked especially about the quadruple helix model inspired by URBACT in order to be most effective with EU funding. And he linked that concept to a decade of engagement in EU affairs, including, for example, an application for the Capital of Culture. And he said that new challenges like the Green Deal, digital transformation, and social innovation are central to the city's inclusive approach to EU funding. And his top tip, in conclusion, was ask policymakers, and especially the mayor, to work together with you and use the URBACT tools together. And he reassured that that would be a fruitful exercise. In the deep dive on project costing, Regina went back over the metro lines-based tools that we'll hear more about in future. And then Christina focused more on how to cost a project. And some of the tips emerging were to always allow, for instance, an extra 10% for unexpected costs, to ask colleagues and suppliers to be accurate. Don't just make it up, don't guess. Ask for accurate costings to go into your bid, for instance, on staff or materials, and keep your budget as close as you can to reality. We had 2 Meet the Funder sessions yesterday. For Horizon Europe, Maria Yeroyani from DG Research and Innovation presented the city's mission and the first call for 100 carbon neutral cities that was launched back in November 2021. It turns out 377 EU cities have applied to that call. Quite a few URBACT cities in there too, which is great. And the selection is expected quite soon in spring 2022. In addition, under this cities mission, there are going to be 5 other ongoing calls focusing on climate neutrality in cities, and their deadline is April 2022. Then there'll be another call in September 2022. So the Secretariat will continue to share useful links with you in the coming days on those calls. And then the last Meet the Funder session was with the European Urban Initiative. Colleagues from the European Commission explained the future urban dimension of cohesion policy and how resources from the European Union structural funds could be invested in cities. and they quoted 115 billion euros over the next 7 years. The European Urban Initiative itself is a new programme that will combine innovative actions, capacity building, and knowledge sharing. 2 urban megatrends of climate and digital transition have been identified, and these are similar actually to URBACT's priority topics, which also include gender equality. And these will be important transversal issues to be addressed by all applicant cities to innovative actions. The first calls are expected in the second half of this year, 2022. And as always, the advice is to be in touch with funding authorities early. In the case of the EU structural funds, so that's European Regional Development Fund and European Social Fund, that means your managing authority, the institution that administers the operational programme. We know from experience that that isn't always so easy. And URBACT is going to be publishing a refreshed guide to managing authorities quite soon to help you navigate the complexity and the jargon and hopefully access those funds. And finally, on the funding question, we've seen from the chat that the most common question is, when will the calls be open? Details about these funding calls. So we're going to do our best to keep you informed about all these opportunities. So now let's move on to the programme for today. We're moving on to how to bid for funds. It's the same format, which I'm sure you're familiar with by now, working in the morning from 10 till 12, and in the afternoon from 2 till 4. From 10 till 11, we have the live session here from the studio in Brussels with a pre-recorded talk and some discussion with the speaker and some cities who can bring their experience. Then from 11 to 12, you'll work in your network groups in Hopin again with the Miro board. You can try out a couple of tools we've set up for you, but you might also choose to have a general debrief to kind of absorb all this learning from the last 3 days and figure out how you can best integrate that into all your plans in the next 6 months. After lunch this afternoon from 2 to 4, there are several optional sessions for you. We're going to have office hours, as always, from the speaker. You can go and talk to her about how to write a good funding application. We're going to have 1 deep dive session and 20 national sessions. And then at 4 o'clock, we'll have a closing session. So we'll give you more detail about all of that later. But let's get started with today's topic, how to write a winning funding application. And we're going to listen to Marion Cugnet, who's an URBACT expert who's going to talk us through it.
Hello everyone, my name is Marion Cugnet, and today I will talk to you about how to best prepare a funding application as part of the URBACT capacity building for cities to help you seek investment and effectively implement your sustainable urban development plans. Preparing a funding application is time-consuming and can be stressful, if not daunting. Depending on the funding opportunity that you've identified, the degree of complexity of the application process and application form can vary. EU funds tend to be quite complex, very competitive with lower success rates, whereas local or regional funding can be more accessible and easier to apply for. Smaller projects are also easier to develop. If you're a first-time applicant, it might be better to start with a smaller project and a less complex program. Having said that, you do not need to be a big player to win. Very successful applications are submitted by first-time applicants or smaller organizations, and some programs are actually encouraging new applicants to participate in their calls. So, how to secure support and resources to write a successful application? I will talk you through some key steps and present some tools to help you develop your proposal, and I will address some of the key features of a winning application as well. I'll also share some insight and tips to help you feel even more confident about how to approach and develop a winning proposal. At that stage, you would already have answered the question, why bid? And you would have confirmed the strategic fit with your organization and gotten the green light to go ahead with the development of your application. You've already spent time identifying the right funding opportunity, developing your project ID, and you might even already have a concept note about your project. The best way to kick off is to plan, and do your research. Planning ahead is key. in particular for projects where you are expected or required to bid with partners. Indeed, writing a project proposal and collecting all the information and documents can be a very lengthy process. Writing a proposal is not a fully linear process, and you will need to factor time to write the content, reviewing it, rewriting it, and finally proofreading it. So really, the best way to go about it is to develop your proposal development schedule and stick to it. So, have you developed your proposal development plan, outlining clear deadlines and the roles and the responsibilities? Treat your proposal development process as any other projects that will need a team, resources, and a plan. Tools such as a bidding Gantt chart and a content allocation table can be very useful. To develop your Gantt chart and bidding plan, start with the submission deadline and work your way backwards towards the first day of the content development. Then go through the application templates. Also identify those sections for which you will need to plan for internal approval time. Clearly mark these key milestones in your project development plan. Then outline the different sections of the proposal and who is responsible for developing it. Share it with the proposal development team so that everybody is fully aware of their roles and their deadlines. This leads us to the next step, setting up your bidding team. Developing as much clarity on how much time and resources is expected from your team to write your proposal will help you stick to your original plan. What you might want to do is map out what the proposal is trying to achieve against the capacity that you have within your organizations to develop the proposal and potentially later on to implement the project. If these are not in place, or if you identify some skills gap, you might want to consider bringing on board external people. This could be staff that are external to your team but within your organization. They can also be people from the partners that contribute to your project, your local stakeholders, or even some commission expertise that you will bring to write the proposal. There are 3 key main roles to your bidding team, and these are the bid coordinator that will be managing the overall development of the proposal, the bid writers that will write most of the content of the proposal, and the bid reviewer that will do a kind of a review and mock appraisal of your proposal later at a later stage. There are then what we call the bid contributors, and these are people that have technical or scientific expertise and that will provide very specific input to contribute only to specific sections in your proposal. Finally, across all these roles and additional people that you might want to bring on board, you will have some key skills and competencies that you would want to consider. Once you've identified all the skills and competencies, you can really build your bidding team. But be mindful of not having too many bid writers or too many contributors involved in your process. You really want to avoid having too many cooks in your kitchen, but you want to have the best cooks that contribute to your proposal. So we've talked about setting up your bid writing process, developing your plan and your bidding team. Now it's time to talk about doing your research. And by this, I mean read through all the funding guidelines and the core documentation so that you are familiarized with the funder's requirements. So make sure you are very clear about the eligibility criteria, the technical and narrative requirements, the evaluation criteria, the attachments, whether you need to submit some or if you can submit additional ones, the deadline, and how to submit your application. Do attend any information day or webinar on the course you are applying for. But also, do not hesitate to contact your funding authority if they are open for clarifications and questions. Check the deadline for submitting the questions, and most of all, follow their advice. Then the next step is, have you developed a skeleton of the application form covering all the sections and questions that the funders require? Go through your application form and copy and paste all the sections and the questions. This is your skeleton. If there is a guide for applicants that guide you through the questions, read it thoroughly and make notes. Complete your entire skeleton before you start writing. It works in pairs with your content allocation table. Now, I will address some of the key features to consider for a high-quality proposal. And as an assessor, I can tell you it makes a big difference to address them in the quality of your application. Why are your partnership, your methodology and your approach the best? Will your proposal stand out from the competition, from the hundreds of proposals that the funders may be receiving? There are a few things that you can do to ensure that you develop a high-quality proposal. Be specific. Assessors don't like vagueness. Therefore, make sure you address and explain every point that you make. But also back your statements and provide relevant evidence and data. There are commonalities about what the funders usually ask. The first one is the strategic fit and contribution to the program objectives. Whichever fund or competition you apply for, there is a good chance that you're going to have to answer this question. And it is also very likely that this is going to be the first thing that the assessors will read. So make a good impression from the start. Pay attention to your funder's aim versus your project aims. Your proposal sits where they cross over. Clearly link the program objectives with your project objectives. A good way to present this is to create a table highlighting the program objectives, your project objectives, and adding key performance indicators. Clearly showing the links between all these elements will get you from a score of good to excellent, as it already demonstrates the relevance and the coherence of your project. In any case, when you develop that section, make sure that you are within the scope. You might want to contact again the funding authority to ask them to check that and confirm that your project ID and how you will contribute to their program is within the scope of the call or the competition. Another key feature of a winning proposal is a strong partnership or a strong consortium that tells a story. Again, this might seem obvious, but this is also one of the riskiest elements of developing a proposal, whereby you might have some partners that pull out at the last second or that don't come through. First, make sure that you remember the funder's requirement for the creation of a partnership, if a partnership is required. You might need to have a certain number of partners, you might need to have a certain type of partners, whether you need to bring on board a small business, a research organization, a university, an academic partner, or a civic society partner. Some funds also have some geographical balance and coverage requirements. Ensure that you bring on board the diversity of geographical locations from your partners that is required, as well as the coherence between them. A partnership with complementary skills will be all the more solid and relevant. When contacting prospective partners, use a questionnaire and suggest a follow-up call. Unresponsive partners are a warning sign. A well-developed questionnaire will help you select the best partners and ensure a good coherence of your partnership and a good relevance as well. When you approach your partners, also make sure that you already have some ideas of the roles that you want them to play in your projects. When seeking partners, you can also contact your national contact points for the programs you are applying for, or if there exists a national contact point in other countries where you would like to identify partners as well. In any case, what you need to keep in mind when you present your partnership in your application form is that your partnership needs to tell a story. It needs to be clear why the partners come together, what they will be doing together. A third key feature that is very important for a winning proposal is to ensure the coherence. Coherence of the methodology, coherence of the activities, coherence of the work plan. So what you want to do is check, do the methodology and activities align with my work plan? Do the actions I am proposing to deliver clearly link to the project objectives and the objectives of the funders as well? You also need to demonstrate the impact of your project, and for that you need to make sure that you have developed strong key performance indicators that are clearly measuring the progress and the impact of your project. If the funders requires that you use external expertise, such as a program like URBACT, make sure you consider and address that in your activities as well. In most cases, the assessors will assess the whole application and read through the entire proposal that you submit. So in order to maintain the good flow of your proposals and to make sure that the coherence is shown, etc., you can refer from one section to the other without repeating the information. In very few instances, it might be that the assessors will only read one section and assess one section of your application. In such cases, it is usually made very clear in the fund specification and the assessment criteria, and you might need to do some repetitions here. But otherwise, Do avoid making repetition and cross-refer the section. That's also a very strong link that your proposal is coherently developed. So what you want to do with regard to the coherence is make sure that you've addressed the what and the how of your project. Developing a logic intervention model is a useful tool to structure the development of your project as well. It includes all the elements that you want to present your project in a coherent and convincing way. If you're building on a previous project or you're seeking to implement some actions of your integrated action plan, make sure that you refer to it as well, that you mention the challenges that you might face, but also all the positive actions that you expect from it and how you will use it. Do not overlook any section in your application. If the funders have asked for some information, it is there for a purpose. From experience, one of the sections that tends to be overlooked by applicants is the budget justification. You've defined your budget, but you need to clearly demonstrate how it links to your activities and how it will be implemented, how coherent it is with with your work plan. A final key feature that I want to mention here is to really pay attention to the style of your application. Help the assessor read through your application. Present it in a very clear way. A few things that you can do here is that ensure that you know your audience. Explain any acronyms. If you use some complex terms, make sure that you explain them clearly so that technical and non-technical readers can understand them. Also ensure that the style is appropriate to the funders. You might want to refer back to the vocabulary and the jargon that they use and use it in your proposal as well. Be mindful of word or character counts. Use bullet points to cut down on the numbers. Also, be concise and be precise. Keep your sentences short and to the point. Try and use as few words as possible to illustrate your point, and also try to summarize your idea in the first sentences of your section. That will also help the assessor understand what you want to say more clearly. If you can add visual or appendices, do it, but be thrifty about it. You do not want to overload the assessor either. In any case, double check if you can add attachment, and if you can, also double check in what format, in what size, and what needs to be provided with your applications. Now I'm going to talk about a last step into your proposal's development, which is organizing a mock appraisal of your proposal. Once you've got a draft version of your proposal ready, it is very useful to bring on board an external pair of eyes to review the proposal. This person will be able to see inconsistencies or misunderstandings that you might not have spotted because you've been so close to the text when you were writing it. A mock appraiser will be able to check the eligibility criteria again. They will also spot any inconsistency and review the coherence of the narrative of your project. They will also check the accuracy of the budget and that it is in line with what you want to deliver. They will be able to assess the application against the assessment criteria. They will also check if you have all the documents that need to be provided in the right format, the right size, and that nothing is missing. In summary, for a winning proposal, what you need is an experienced team and good planning, a strong partnership, a coherent proposal, a demonstrated impact, a justified budget, and the X factor. That's it for me for today. Thank you very much for your attention, and most of all, best of luck for a successful application.
Now we can welcome Marion here in the studio. Hi Marion, how are you?
Hello, good morning Sally, very well thanks. Good morning everyone.
Good. So great film again, you've a lot of detail in there, you've broken down all of the steps that people need to go through to write a winning application. So my first question for you is really, you know URBACT networks and cities, and most of our cities tuning in are at the final stages of developing their integrated action plan. So what's your advice to them about how they use the ideas, the information, the indicators, everything that they've got in that plan to feed into a really good application?
Yeah, so as you rightly said, over the last 2.5 years, the networks have been gathering and collecting a wealth of information on the political issue or urban issue that they want to address through the action plan, on key facts and figures locally, but also benchmarking amongst themselves. So that's all kind of information that they can really keep under their elbow and feed into their application, because there's going to be a contextual demand in the application forms, whatever the funding, whether it's local funding or it's European funding. So really collect that information and make it ready for purpose into your future application form. Another thing is all the work that's been done around creating the partnership. Working with stakeholders, that's expertise that you've already mobilized when you developed your integrated action plan. And that's something you can develop and use when you create your project ID, when you further develop it. And you can bring this expertise when it's time to write the proposals, as we already mentioned in the video. But then another thing is the work that's been done on defining the actions, ranking the actions, defining the priorities in the action plans. And actually, once you've got those actions very clearly detailed and with the integrated approach that's been used as well, all the different elements of the integrated approach, then that's information that's also ready to be exported. You can select one action that's going to match a funding priority, or you can cluster some of them. It's all this background work, basically, that fits into the plan, and that's going to be very useful and makes also the project ID and the identification of the opportunity much easier for the cities.
I think so. Let's hope so. So we've got these cities who are now preparing to write these applications from the action plans if they need to get investment, which I think most cities will. Can you tell us a bit about the scary bit, which is the hit rate, the success rate of some of the big funds? You know, it can be, I know you've worked across lots of different programs, so you know kind of what you're going into when you submit an application, what your chance of success is. Tell us a bit about that, and also how to be brave enough to still go for it in some cases.
Yes, so applying for funding is a competition, and success rates are usually quite low if we talk about mostly European programs, but also local ones such as ERDF or ESF. On average, I would say it's about 10% of success rate, so it seems a bit daunting and terrifying to say so. However, if you go into the development of your proposal and with the right mindset, whatever resources and work you put into your proposal development is never lost. And that's really something that you can capitalize on, even if you're not successful. It's the partnership that you build. It's the sharing of the ideas with your local ecosystem. It's helping plan further, actually. And also, if you are successful, it's all the best. It's a great practice, and it's actually something to really talk about and promote. If you are not successful, there are a lot of lessons that you can learn as well. Most of the programs will provide feedback on why your proposal wasn't successful. And it's not necessarily because the idea was bad. It's, as someone rightly said, it's not a test, it's a contest. So your ID, you can recycle it, you can work on the weaknesses that have been identified, but it also might be a trigger to actually look for other opportunities or other types of funding. It might be that a big European program is not the right fit at the moment, and you can look at more like local opportunities or creating alternative funding within your local partnership to start implementing the ID, and then you build your credentials, you build your experience, and you can then reapply. But I would say it's never lost, whatever the results.
I think that's a really good message, and sometimes there are opportunities that would come up that you can jump on quickly because you're well prepared. You know, there might be another way of funding parts of your plan that only become apparent because of the fact that you submitted an application and worked with people. So I think that's really, really important. I want to pick up on a question that came up in the chat actually yesterday from Sonia Puyol in Manresa in Spain, who was asking about advice for bringing in partners from the private sector, not just being reliant on government or on public sector funds or grants. And the private sector can play a role in lots of different ways in funding applications. But do you have any advice about that, how to engage and encourage co-financing?
Yes, so I would say the first advice is if you approach a private sector partner that you want to bring onto your project, it's really, first of all, demonstrating what's in it for them. they need to understand why you approach them. You need to understand what role they would be playing, because you can't ask a private sector partners to spend time on your project or to contribute to your project without anything to have in return. It's a business protocol in a way. There are a few things that you can do if you're looking at a more like place-based approach to your project. If it's a city center, a regeneration project, for instance, you've got organizations such as business improvement districts whose mission is actually to try and leverage funding, leverage recognition for the city centers, liveliness, etc. So you can work with them together on what's the best actions that they want to do and incorporate that in your projects. There are also the opportunities that you might be able to provide through your project in terms of infrastructure, whether you have a virtual or a physical innovation lab where the businesses and the private sector partners can contribute to and use to test their products, or outreach to their local customers or communities and demonstrate through their corporate social responsibility obligations sometimes to the impact they're doing and what they're doing for the communities. And then there's, in terms of like more like official investment, there's this new-ish trend of place-based impact investment that some of the investors in your local ecosystem, or maybe a bit like at regional and national level, might be interested in your project idea because there's going to be a direct impact on their local communities and it matches what they want to do with their funds. So it's, again, about demonstrating the impact that you want to have with your project, and then you can try and convince them. But really give them a role in your project, because if they have a role, they have visibility, and they have an opportunity to kind of also promote themselves as having an impact. So
I think that's really good advice. It's partly about a different culture in the way that you approach a business, like what's in it for them in your mind foremost. But also we've got a few networks working on similar topics, and in fact the fireside talk yesterday, on day one, Wessel Badenhorst talked about business improvement districts as one of the possibilities in the iPlace network, and we have a whole network working on corporate social responsibility and another one on impact bonds. So hopefully we're learning as well, and we can share that learning amongst our networks about private sector involvement in the city investment strategy. I'm going to ask you one more question before we bring in a city, and that's about really what, looking forward, a lot of the new programs are now launching, Horizon Europe, the structural funds programs, and with your sort of a long-term experience, I wondered if you've spotted any changes or trends in these new programs that we should really watch out for. Are they asking different questions? What are they looking for in projects if it's changed slightly from going into the future?
Yes, so I would say probably like the one thing that comes to my mind at the moment is impact and measurability of the results of your project, about the definition of key performance indicators to measure the impact of the project. It seems to be that there's always been an interest in demonstrating impact when you receive public funding in particular. But at the moment, there seems to be like a real dive into demonstrating the realistic measurability of what it's going to be, why the budget is going to be used for. So I would say, yes, a lot of attention in defining relevant key performance indicators in your project. For example, if the objective of your project is to improve air quality, and you're asked to reduce a certain amount of PMs emissions or CO2 emissions, etc., just be really back up your KPIs with a good, realistic, scientific, I would say almost, scientific evidence, and make it very, very relevant to your project and to scale. There is also a trend and across all the projects to really address the digital transition and the green transition, the cross-cutting themes, as well as gender and diversity and equality matters. And again, this needs to be included in your demonstration of impact, because it's not just a political commitment that you're going to make in your project. You actually need to really show how you're going to implement it within your partnership, but also within your projects. So I would say these are the two main trends.
Useful advice. And we had a session yesterday on indicators and measuring, and it's something we will continue to focus on. I mean, it's good practice in and of itself, but the fact that programs are going to be more on it and looking at that is a really good reason to continue to work on that.
And it will help demonstrate also for further applications to other fundings. Actually, if you've got those KPIs in place, then you can build upon them to bid for more.
Cool. So thanks for now, Marion. Stay with me. It's always good to talk to cities who've had this experience. I'm now going to bring in Tracy Johnson, Digital Media Centre Manager from Barnsley in the UK, and Elisa Vlasic, URBACT expert from Dubrovnik, both coming in live on Zoom. I think we're connected. So, good morning, ladies. Can you tell us if you can hear us okay?
All good.
Good. Hi.
Can we hear you?
I hope so.
Yes, Tracy, we heard you. That's great. Thank you. How about Elisa?
Yep, I'm here. I can hear you all.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So welcome on board this morning on this discussion about, it's the last day of the e-University and we're really getting into the detail of funding applications. So Tracy, can we start with you? Perhaps you need to tell us first of all what the Digital Media Centre is for people who are not familiar with it. So if you could tell us a bit about that, but also as lead partner of a couple of URBACT networks, Tech Town and Tech Revolution, you've been working on the digital economy locally. We know that Barnsley was awarded an URBACT Good Practice for the Digital Media Centre. So you've clearly been really successful in creating a supportive environment for your work, but also accessing hard cash. So can you give us an idea of how much you've raised? And can also tell us, what are your top tips for other cities?
Thanks, Sally. Yeah, so we are part of the City of Barnsley, the Digital Media Centre. We're part of our Enterprise in Barnsley business support team that is there to help to grow Barnsley's economy. And it's a really different way, I guess, of doing economic development that we've been working on. And a huge amount of that has been down to the work that we've done through our URBACT networks as well. So I lead on our digital economy development, really, and also work very closely at regional level in terms of trying to scale up that digital ecosystem to support both growth in that sector, but also the adoption of technologies, the application of technologies across other industries and also within the public sector too. So it's a broad church that I work in, and a lot of that has been down to the work that we've done through our URBACT programs as well. In terms of raising funding, yeah, I did a little bit of quick maths, and actually the total that we've impacted on in terms of funding raised across a number of partners is now around £40 million, which is more than I realised, actually. It's useful to do that exercise of reflecting on what you've been able to contribute to raising. But that's been a real sort of journey, if you like, in terms of getting that funding together. Not all of it directly is about our action plan delivery. Some of it is about the wider work that needs to be done to enable our action plan to be successful. So but I think it's important to recognise that we've driven a lot of that, we've enabled a lot of that to happen, which is a really sort of positive outcome. But I guess in terms of top tips, my first one would be to engage somebody like Marion, because clearly there's a huge amount of knowledge in people like Marion, and being able to look at this from a technical perspective as well as a real sort of thematic perspective and city level perspective. They're skills that you really, really need to bring in if you want to be successful. And I would wholeheartedly recommend doing that as a city, to bring in that external skill set and make sure it's somebody that you can really work with. People like Marion are fantastic to work with. But I do have a few other tips, and they're probably less technical, but I think my experience is based on how we've worked through our action planning process and the transfer network process too. And I think the number one is that recognising the value of the action plan. You possibly sometimes don't when you're in the middle of developing it. But I think the integrated action plan with really easy to understand key messages is an absolutely amazing tool to communicate ideas and provide that strategic and logical weight behind those great ideas. If you can get funders engaged early, even in that action planning process, and be part of the creation of the plan, they're much more invested in it too. They want to see that success happen and they understand what it is you're trying to deliver. Um, so I would say build that relationship with funders, integrate them into the planning process where you can. But really in the plan, make sure you're setting that story of what the future looks like, what's different, what's better, who benefits, and doing that bit of visioning to help everybody get on the same page, understand the story and get people engaged. It really helped us to be as clear as possible about our ask. Our action plan was about developing a digital campus, which was about both the hard and the soft infrastructure needed to grow a digital ecosystem. That sounds very complicated to a lot of people, particularly grant assessors at times, but breaking it down to being about digital learning, digital business and digital people meant people could get more engaged. They might not understand digital, but they understood people, business and place. So, those things are really, really important. My next tip is definitely that to stay flexible. The best plans are flexible. Um, you can set out that future position, but you have to accept the change that will happen, and that agility is absolutely needed to respond to these constantly changing political, economic, social, health landscapes. So, for example, for our digital campus, for the capital elements, it's going to be a long journey to secure the funding. It's a huge multi-million pound development regeneration development opportunity, and for that we've secured around about 20 million so far for capital works, which is within our city control as well as within one of our partners. But we have to respond to what future funding might come up. And I think one example within that is that the campus itself was not intended to include an active travel hub, so a centre to really encourage more active travel around the urban environment. But by including it, it addresses both a city requirement and ambition, but also it helps us to achieve sustainability goals. And it really has helped in terms of securing funding to enable the first phase of the digital campus to happen.
Right.
My next tip is just to expect to spin a lot of plates. There's a lot of different funding out there, and you'll have a mix of capital and revenue asks. So, and it's unusual to find one funder that will fund it all. So expect to work hard and have to really bring a mix of different funding into that project that you've got. And I think recognizing the role of other projects in terms of doing that as well, and building on that, collaborators are the superpower. You don't have to do everything as the city. Bring in partners, work with the public sector, work with the private sector, and make sure your stakeholders are as active in raising that funding as possible. You don't have to do everything. You don't have to lead on everything as the city. If you enable and empower other people to do it, you get even more money and even more bang for your buck and even more impact from your action plan.
Thanks, Tracy. Absolutely loads packed in those top tips. And I have to say, if I was on Hopin, I'd be doing the emoji for applause when I heard 40 million. That's quite extraordinary amount. And I can't believe you didn't know it. Without you thought it was less than that. And you had to go on the back of an envelope and add it all up. That's really impressive. So thanks for all of those tips, which we've heard a bit about over the last few days, including especially this bringing stakeholders in, getting people invested. And Marion just mentioned it too, getting people invested with a shared vision of what you want to do, telling it as a story, and expecting to spin a lot of plates. Really, really good advice. So thanks for that. I'm going to come over to Elisa now in Dubrovnik. Elisa, you've been a partner in URBACT networks, focusing also on digital, but also more broadly economic development. Can you tell us how you went about bringing this investment into Dubrovnik from, I think, national and EU funds, but especially in the context of a new member state?
Yes, thank you, Sally. So in Dubrovnik, just kind of to give an overview as an introduction, it's a small city. So it's a city with about 42,000 inhabitants. So basically the challenges that Dubrovnik is facing and was facing are challenges that most of the small cities are facing all over Europe. So it is very difficult for a small city to have a really well-defined local strategies, to have its local strategies really well aligned with the national strategies and really matching on the fundings that are going to happen. and also the challenges of really lacking in-house right skills for securing these national and EU fundings. So when Dubrovnik first started with URBACT, got involved in URBACT as one of the last countries that actually got into EU, it did not really have a practice of involving different stakeholders when they were creating any local documents, strategic documents. So this was a bit new for us, for the city of Dubrovnik. And we, at that point, with a lot of help with these different tools from URBACT, we started engaging really a wide range of stakeholders. And when I say of stakeholders, I really mean really from different sectors, but even what was really important for us, from different political parties. And this actually assured us the sustainability of implementation of our action plans afterwards. It gave a bit of an ownership to all of the sides of the political parties. And this was really a great win in Dubrovnik case. And also, when we are talking about having all these priorities aligning, and I think we heard a lot about this within 2 previous days within e-university, for a city like Dubrovnik, for any small city, it's such a difficult thing to have its own local priorities, having in light on a regional level, then on a national level, and then on an EU level. And this was really a great focus for Dubrovnik, and actually a great ticket to a success for securing funding afterwards. And I would call it lobbying on a national level, if I can say it in that way. The city put a high priority in including its people, including people from different departments, really local people understanding the local issues, putting them in a different working groups on a national level. So whenever the documents are created on a national level, usually every country has different working groups. And I would say to every small city out there in Europe that it's so important. Sometimes it can seem as a waste of time and just spending of resources, but it's so important to have a person that is actually entitled. So having your own person from the city representative that is entitled on giving suggestions and being really an active participant within these working groups that are actually working on the strategic documents, and which are always followed by the fundings later on. So Dubrovnik was very successful in this, and I think the city has its own representatives in almost all areas on the national level, and this really helped a lot to have its own priorities heard on a different level, and having this match with its own local strategies, and then the fundings and the open calls that it would open up. And then the third part, the great lack of skills, of in-house skills. Dubrovnik city went about this in a sense of having its own city development agency. So it's a city-owned, 100% owned development agency. And these development agencies are actually something that are happening all over Croatia. A lot of cities have them. And this is an agency that has a group of employees that are actually city employees at one point, having really needed key skills for applying for funding. Why is it so important to have this company, a city-owned company? Because sometimes the city, we all know it, whether we admit it or not, but the bureaucracy in the cities can be really slow sometimes, and all the management things and all the day-to-day work sometimes slows down the project and the funding way of working, which sometimes has to be quick and fast. And when the open call is there, you need to react in a fast manner and so on. So these kind of agencies, you work basically as a private company, but you are publicly owned. And I think this was a great win for Dubrovnik because it has, let's say, an in-house trained experts for funding, and their only aim is developmental projects of this city, of Dubrovnik in this case. So these were... Yeah.
I'm going to jump in now because we need to keep moving, and I'm going to bring in the URBACT team in a minute, and they might have questions for you. That's why I want to make sure we've got time to take questions that are coming in from the chat as well. But I think what you just said there is it's actually quite interesting because it's quite different from the Barnsley case, and that this whole concept of making sure that your voice is heard at national level, or your city's voice is heard in the places where the funds are being shaped is really interesting. And also this idea of what vehicle you have at city level to be able to be agile and flexible and move faster than maybe would otherwise be the case when it comes to funding. So I'm going to come back to you both in a minute, Tracy and Elisa, but it's now time to say hi again to this in the studio to the URBACT team for any inputs or questions that we've had through Hopin or social media, which might also be addressed to any of our guests. So Clementine, Capacity Building Officer, welcome back, and Hendrik van der Poel, Capacity Building Intern. How are you both?
Hi, Sally. We're good. Thank you.
Hi, Sally.
Thanks again also to all the participation and the participants. There is a lot of engagement in the chat again. I'm reading the comments.
I'm not sure sorry, just a minute, Hendrik. I'm not sure if we see you today.
Yeah, we see you.
Sorry, we're good. Thank you. So we see you now. That's good. Great. Thank you. Go ahead.
I hope you see me then in any case. I'm going to mention some comments, especially now from Ian, who said the importance of logic models that are really effective, especially in communicating the impact of your project itself. And from Miguel, who mentioned that, in order to get big money for cities, you really have to do some effective negotiation and lobbying. There was also some questions and some comments on the estimation of the operational phase of bid writing and application. And Mirna said that the more you are involved in the project itself, the less expensive it becomes. And I had a question for you: on the estimations of this operational phase. What is the estimation of the cost, and do you have any advice to keep the cost as low as possible?
So that was a question about the cost of developing the applications, I guess. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So and that's a great summary of what's going on in the chat. Thanks, Hendrik. So perhaps I'll come to Elisa. Do you have a comment on cost? And then maybe Marion, just quickly, if you could tell us if you've have any sense of how to make sure that it's affordable, any investment in this first phase, yeah?
Well, I would again mention the importance of actually having in-house people. So having a person that is actually really well trained for this, that would cost a lot of it. But also having all the employees going through regular like PCM workshops and just understanding the project logic, I think costs really cut on the cost, because as many people you have that understand the project logic, it makes it so much more efficient actually when you start developing the whole project. If you're not taking the external experts. Taking the external experts would actually depend on the value of the project that you are applying for on the bid. So depending on how big is the bid would probably be a ratio of it on how much it would cost to have an external expert working. But even taking an external expert, the experience from Dubrovnik has been that the external expert has to work with the local team all the time. If it doesn't work with a local team, the expenses will be probably a lot higher afterwards when you start implementing the project, because very rarely it's completely aligned with the needs, and the understanding of local implementation sometimes gets a little bit lost here.
Thanks, Elisa. Good tips there. Marion, do you have any quick view on that?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with Elisa, actually, that it's super important when you're an external expert that's commissioned to help develop a project and write a bid to be fully in contact with the team that's within the local authority, within the department first, to understand the priorities, but also, as you rightly say, to put in place the right activities within the project and the right layout of the governance, and understanding the budget constraint and the political constraints as well. It's a collaborative effort. An external expert is here to support and provide the technical or more like expert support in some areas of the bid writing, but it's never going to be developing the full project for go on its own. It's
So quite an interesting relationship to develop.
Yeah.
I'm going to go back to Clémentine because we're getting towards the top of the hour. Clémentine, do we have anything on social media today?
Yes, we have. But just before we go to the social media, I really want to thank everyone on board for their commitment and their engagement indeed on the chat. I mean, you'll go back to that, Sally, afterwards, but the debate that are taking place there is really, really interesting. And you've also been actually very active on social media. We have at the moment about 80 tweets mentioning the hashtag eUniversity 2022. And so thanks for that, and also many more with a lot of pictures. It's particularly nice for us to see all your Myo board, your work that you are doing during the network workshop. And I just want to highlight one tweet that I found quite funny, is from Kimos, who took a very, very literal approach to the fireside talk. So I hope you were comfy there, Kimo, but and this was a nice one. And you've also been quite active on the gallery in the virtual photo booth. So if we can have the slide on that. And here I really want to I mean, it's nice to see that some of you actually used your kids and dogs to make it to the photo booth gallery slide. So that's nice. And it's also funny to see Jan and Mary trying to find their way on the metro system map. So thanks again. Just for information on the gallery, all the picture that will be taken will be used for a mosaic that's going to be displayed during the festival in June. So go crazy on the virtual booth, and you have still a few hours to do so, and thanks for all the beautiful pictures.
Thanks, Clémentine, and thanks, Hendrik, for those updates. Yeah, big encouragement. Keep on social media. Those photos are great, so keep posting photos, and we'll make use of them and share them with you all. I'm afraid we're running out of time. This conversation could go on a lot longer, and we've got amazing expertise, both through Zoom and in the room. But thanks to Marion, to Tracy, and Elisa for sharing that with us. Marion, I think you're available for office hours this afternoon for specific questions.
Yes, I will be.
Cool. So feel free to come and tap Marion's knowledge live this afternoon. I'm going to start wrapping up on this morning's live session so we can move on to the network exercises. We've prepared mirror boards for you to work in your network groups with 3 options you can see on the screen there. You might also want to do a general debrief. And before we go, here's a reminder of what's happening this afternoon. So we have a deep dive session at 2 o'clock this afternoon, just one deep dive. That's going to be about securing partnerships and support with tips, tools, and examples of how to make your work essential and your integrated action plan a success. Rebecca Paulding, who's the lead expert of Access, is going to facilitate that, and she's crowdsourced some great ideas from other networks and cities about how they've managed to get this sort of multi-party political support and make sure that they've got visibility for their action plan going forward. At 2:15, we have office hours. So Marion Cugnet is going to be answering all your questions about writing successful bids. Then at 3 o'clock, it's a bit different this afternoon. We're going to have 20 national sessions. You can see hopefully on screen now a slide of the flags. If you belong to one of these member states, you will have a national session. They're also listed on the Hop-In platform under sessions. These sessions are going to be led by the national URBACT points. It means you can finally exchange with peers in your own language for an hour and get to know each other, cities from your own country, and talk about funding opportunities that might be at national or local level. For the few participants who don't have a national session, that's a very small minority, you could actually create one yourself and invite others. And you can see from this slide how to do that. So in Hop-In, you can see the arrow showing you there's a button that says create a session. Feel free to do that between 3 and 4. And then reconnect to the main stage at 4 o'clock for a closing session. We'll see you there. So, but for now, it's wrapping up from the live studio. You need to click on sessions, find your own network, join your lead partner, lead expert, and your network partners to work together on this next stage. So have fun with that, and see you again this afternoon.